Hello, I'm Karin Giannone and welcome to Pretoria at the end of 2 long days in court in which we finally learnt the verdict by Judge THOKOZILE MASIPA on Oscar Pistorius in this 6-month murder trial. Oscar Pistorius found guilty not of murder, but premeditated murder as the state had gone for, but of culpable homicide for killing his girlfriend Reeva Steenkamp. Before we discuss the implications of that conviction, let's just look back at the day in court. My colleague Nomsa Maseko has this report.
Oscar Pistorius arriving in court. Not guilty of murder, but still not a free man. Judge THOKOZILE MASIPA first dealt with 3 firearms charges brought at the same time as the main charge that the athlete shot and killed Reeva Steenkamp.
The state has failed to establish that the accused is guilty beyond reasonable doubt of this count and has to be acquitted.
Once again, prosecution evidence was called into question, described as too weak to secure conviction for 2 of those 3 charges. But Oscar Pistorius was found guilty of negligence when a gun he was holding went off at a crowded restaurant. By itself, that conviction could carry a prison sentence. Then Judge MASIPA moved to the verdict.
The accused is found not guilty and is discharged. Instead, he is found guilty of culpable homicide.
Outside the court, discontent from the state prosecuting body.
We are disappointed that we did not get or secure a conviction on premeditated murder, and also that there was an acquittal on the other 2 charges.
The verdict is probably the best the Pistorius family could have hoped for.
We always knew the facts of the matter, and we had never any doubt in Oscar's version.
So Oscar Pistorius is free for now. Lawyers meet again in October to argue over his sentence. He could still go to prison for years or face as little as a fine. Nomsa Maseko, BBC News, Pretoria High Court.
Well, you heard a little of the reaction to that verdict there in Nomsa's report, but what about the reaction from other quarters to the fact that Oscar Pistorius has not been convicted of murder and he has had bail given to him again to spend the next month at his uncle's house, not in custody? Our Africa correspondent Andrew Harding looks at the wider reaction to the case.
Oscar Pistorius, shortly after he'd killed Reeva Steenkamp. From the very beginning, he insisted it was a terrible mistake, that he and Reeva, seen arriving at his home a few hours earlier, were very much in love.
I was simply trying to protect Reeva. I can promise that when she went to bed that night, she felt loved.
In court, but not shown on the cameras, Pistorius maintained that he shot through his bathroom door, convinced an intruder had broken into his home. His grief and regret were compelling.
And I sat over Reeva and I cried. And I don't know how long. I don't know how long I was there for. She wasn't breathing.
Pistorius' defence made much of the athlete's vulnerability as a disabled man confronting a perceived threat.
His capacity to walk without his prosthesis is poor, his balance is poor, and he could easily be pushed over. When exposed to a threat, Mr. Pistorius is more likely to respond with a fight response rather than a flight response, as his physical capacity for flight is limited.
The prosecution sought to show there was a darker side to Pistorius, his obsession with guns, his quick temper, and it questioned how the athlete could have made such a terrible mistake.
When you shouted and screamed at Reeva to phone the police, she is 3 meters away from you in a toilet.
That's correct, my lady.
And she never uttered a word.
That's correct, my lady.
It's not probable.
But at the heart of this case was the question of what Pistorius was thinking when he shot 4 times through the toilet door.
I heard this noise and I thought it was somebody coming out to attack me, so I fired my firearm.
Your defence have now changed, sir, from putative self-defence to involuntary action. Is that what you're telling me?
I don't understand the law, ma'am. What I can reply and tell the court is what I'm asked, and I can reply as to what I thought.
Today's verdict suggests the judge believed Pistorius' explanation.
I believe that the judge was swayed by his demeanor on the stand. The judge was swayed by the evidence that was procured by the defense, including, amongst others, the psychological impact that his childhood may have had on him, as well as the experts that were brought in by the defense.
When it comes to murder, then, Oscar Pistorius has been given the benefit of the doubt, and many here consider he's had a lucky escape. As for Reeva Steenkamp's friends and family, they still need to know whether her killer will spend any time in prison. Some of Reeva Steenkamp's friends have already criticised the verdict.
It is unfair, but it doesn't surprise me, and in fact that's pretty much what I expected from the outset. Because he can afford the best possible defence and private investigators to support his case.
Hold the line!
Today, Pistorius left court a free man for now. The judge agreed to extend his bail and rejected the state's claim that he might flee the country. The athlete will be back next month for sentencing. He could still get a prison term.
He could, and I think this is a very serious case of culpable homicide because of the use of the firearm and that particularly that 4 shots were fired. So the judge has a complete discretion. She can impose any kind of sentence. It could even be a non-jail sentence. But I think she needs to send out a strong message to the public.
Tonight, Pistorius is back at his uncle's home. Some in South Africa have forgiven him, some have not. The possibility of a prison sentence still hangs in the air. Andrew Harding, BBC News, Pretoria.
Well, with me here outside the court, defence lawyer MANNIE WITZ and ADELE KIRSTEN from a Gun-Free South Africa campaign group. MANNIE WITZ, first of all, you trained Judge MASIPA as a barrister back in the 90s. How have you viewed what she's been saying in court over the course of these 2 days?
Look, I think she started off her judgment very, very well. She was with me in 1991 when she was a barrister. She became the second black female ever to be appointed in South Africa as a permanent judge, and she's been on the bench ever since. I think she's acquitted herself very well in regards to the way she conducted the trial. She conducted the way a judge should be. She was polite to everybody. She wasn't intrusive. And the last 2 days dealing with the judgment, her weighing up of the evidence, etc., and the way that she came to her findings, to a large extent, I think she did a very, very good job in that regard, especially in regards to the premeditated murder. She put aside a lot of the evidence and said, I need more reliable evidence, and I don't think there's enough for premeditated murder, which has no definition in South African law. Premeditated, as your viewers know, and as I think everybody should know that's got a legal background, means a degree of planning. And even if it's a sudden rage or an argument which could lead, it doesn't have to be an hour before, a year before, a week before, and you pick up a gun and you kill somebody, it could still be premeditated. But she found that the witnesses that the state called just weren't enough in regards to reliability because of the distance. She then dealt with the summing up of the evidence and then applied the legal principles. And then in her own opinion, her legal findings, together with the 2 assessors who play a very, very important role, they can actually outvote the judge, but they agreed with the judge. It was unanimous finding. They made the finding in regards to the facts only. She then applied the law to those particular facts, and she said, well, the only version I've really got is the accused himself, Mr. Pistorius. And she then applied what she believed was the correct findings in regards to his version. And she found, even though he was a poor witness, an evasive witness, and in fact that he lied in certain respects, that she couldn't reject his version as not being reasonably possibly true, for the simple reason, shortly after the unfortunate tragedy and the death of Reeva Steenkamp, he said to an independent witness, Dr. Stipp, a nearby neighbour who came to render assistance, he was a radiologist, he tried to revive the late Reeva Steenkamp, who already seemed to have been in a very, very bad medical condition, and he said, I made a mistake. I shot, I thought it was an intruder, and he kept that at his bail application, he kept that in his trial, and the judge believed him on that regard and in that respect and said, you didn't fabricate this evidence, that is the evidence that you've given, and based on that I find it's reasonably possibly true, even though in a lot of respects you weren't a good witness. So summing it all up, summing up the legal position, There is a lot of criticism, obviously, that's been levelled, because in this case, you've got the smoking gun, you've got the shooter, and you've got the unfortunate victim, the late Reeva Steenkamp. Everybody says, but it's so obvious, you fired through a closed door, it's got to be murder. So, you know, you've got to look at the principles. The onus, the burden of proof, beyond any reasonable doubt, prove the elements of the offence. And if you knock out intention, dolus, the Latin for intention, once there's no intention, you can't have in any way murder. Then you've got to look at the competent verdict, which is the objective test, which is a different test. That first one was subjective, what she believed and what he did in the circumstances, whether it was justified, and that's how she came to her conclusion.
Manny, before I ask you about sentencing, I want to ask Adele, I mean, your overall impression at what you've seen in court, also over the last few months, but particularly the reasoning that we heard from Judge MASIPA.
Well, I want to focus specifically on the nature of the crime, which was what we would see as gun violence. And I think one of the things throughout the trial and over the last 2 days is an increased awareness in the public around the danger of guns in the home. And I think the fact that he has got one conviction on one of the firearms charges.
These were the lesser firearms charges that we were hearing about that were also being heard.
There were 3 of them, and the one is about negligent discharge, which will now automatically, hopefully, disqualify him and have him declared. Her role is to declare him unfit to be a firearm owner. But we have been surprised at her acquitting him on the illegal possession of ammunition. The Act is very clear that you don't have to have intent to possess. In fact, it goes even further. It has a presumption of possession. So let's take an example where perhaps his father had accidentally left the ammunition at his home and hadn't even told him. That is sufficient to see the owner of the property where there is ammunition for which you do not have a license or you do not have a license to deal, that is seen as illegal possession. So that finding is really very surprising and confusing in terms of our understanding of the law.
Very briefly, Adele, I mean, just on the wider case itself, do you feel that this has changed perceptions about gun crime in South Africa or heightened awareness?
Absolutely. I mean, over the last 6 months, gun free has had a significant increase, particularly from women, of saying, I live with my husband, or I have a boyfriend, or I know a neighbor, a woman who's living with a man who abuses alcohol, who has a short temper. What must we do? And this is important because the law is not just for the gun owner. The law is there to help prevent gun violence. And if we again look at the Pistorius case, where there were several incidents where he demonstrated negligence, it would have taken one person, one individual, to have gone to the police station and reported, not laid a charge, but reported, and the police would have been required to hold a Section 102 hearing, which is to say, are you fit and proper to continue possession of your gun? If that hearing had happened, strong chance it would have been removed, he wouldn't have had a gun, and Reeva Steenkamp would still be alive.
That's a very big if, isn't it, Adele? But yes. Of course, the judge only found Oscar Pistorius guilty on one of those yes. gun charges. Just while we...
But an important charge. It's a very significant charge, and it carries a 5-year sentence.
Speaking of sentencing, Manny, I mean, we have a verdict, but we don't know what is Oscar Pistorius' fate beyond the 13th of October. All we know is he's now back at his uncle's on bail, effectively a free man until that date.
Correct, but there's a variety of sentence options open to the judge. The assessors are now relieved of their duties. They play no further role in South African law. The judge, it's up to her discretion. She's the only one who's going to impose a sentence. She'll hear evidence first from the defence. They've got to lead their evidence in mitigation or extenuation, as you'd call it in England or in the United Kingdom. Then the state would lead evidence in aggravation of sentence. Then there'll be legal argument both sides as to what type of sentence should be imposed. I've got no doubt the state will be asking for direct imprisonment. Then it's up to the judge. So she's got various options. He's very fortunate because if it was a murder charge, whether it was the common law murder, the direct intention of the dolus eventualis, premeditated would have carried 25 years, which is life in South Africa. First offender, 15 years on a murder charge, minimum sentence, maximum 20 years, unless you can show substantial and compelling circumstances, which he's got, just his disability alone and the way that he has to cope with life. So it would have probably been a few years less than that. But the judge can probably sentence anywhere up to 15 years effective.
15 years is possibly the maximum for this?
The maximum, although it doesn't fall under the minimum sentence legislation. We've had that since 1998. The legislature and the new government decided that crime was getting out of control, so for serious and violent offences, they put in place minimum sentence. And every year, on the 1st of May, even though it's a public holiday, it's Workers' Day, they just extend it for another year, so it's still in force. There is a minimum sentence. He's very fortunate. He doesn't fall under minimum sentence. So the judge has got a wide variety of options open in regards to sentence, either direct imprisonment or direct imprisonment, of which portion would be suspended. I anticipate that would probably happen. And also, there could be a fine, there could be a suspended sentence, there could be what's called community service. We've had, unfortunately, a few well-known sportsmen, but not violent crimes, who've been no charges against them. They've gone into various underprivileged areas, helped underprivileged kids, done community service. The community can see they're paying back. They show they're not beyond the law. And that's one of the alternative sentences, together with house arrest for a period of 3 years, Section 276(1)(h) of our Criminal Procedure Act. But the judge has got various options open to, but it's her discretion.
Okay, both of you, MANNIE WITZ, ADELE, KIRSTEN, thank you very much indeed for your perspectives. Now, talking of Oscar Pistorius as a sporting icon, the reason why this trial has attracted so much and such a level of international attention and fascination because of his celebrity status, this absolute sporting superstar, 6 gold medals in 3 Paralympic Games, bringing disability sports from the margins to the mainstream. But what went wrong and how did Oscar Pistorius get to this moment? Our chief sports correspondent, Dan Rowan, has this look back at his life.
Oscar Pistorius did more than win races. He changed the way the world viewed disability. But long before he became extraordinary, ordinary was all he wanted to be.
Well, they may call me the Blade Runner, but I'm just Oscar. When I was born with missing calf bones, my parents had faced the very difficult decision of getting my legs amputated. But today, I can look back and say that they definitely made the right decision.
Destined to be one of the great Paralympic athletes of all time.
Few know Pistorius as well as Olympian TALKMORE NYONGANI, his long-term training partner here in Pretoria.
I had a lot of incidents that he helped me. I can't count how many times he helped me. I can say Oscar is a gentleman. He's somebody who sticks to his words, who was chasing a dream, a big dream.
That dream began when at school Pistorius was given carbon fibre prosthetics and began to run.
It was here at the Pilgridge Stadium in Pretoria in March 2004 when a teenage Pistorius, after just 2 months of training with blades, showed just how good he was, running the 100 metres in just 11.51 seconds, a new world record.
Go down 50-50 and rotate.
Confidence was no problem, as Pistorius told the BBC in 2007.
I put in more hours, I eat better, I sleep better, I rest better, and overall I think I'm a more diligent, I train better than the other guys.
Oscar Pistorius is flying away from all of them. 21.99, my goodness.
Paralympic golds followed in Athens and Beijing. By now, Pistorius had become a brand.
They told me that I'd never walk, and a man with no legs can't run. Anything else you want to tell me?
At London, he became the first amputee to run at the Olympics. But by now, stories were also emerging of another side to his character. David O'Sullivan has known Pistorius since he was a boy.
Anu Faree, who was a roommate with Oscar Pistorius, told me that he had to move out of their room because Oscar had gone hysterical on the phone, was shouting and screaming on the phone. It transpired he was shouting and screaming at his then girlfriend and a man who had taken this girl out on an overseas trip. In fact, I had the story confirmed by so many other athletes who said it was terrible to witness this incredible meltdown.
Faree later insisted he'd left his teammates' room on medical advice before a big race, but rumours about Pistorius' private life persisted.
He really seemed to be a different person to the public persona that he was presenting. You heard about the fast cars, how he was an insomniac, he used to go to the shooting range in the middle of the night. So there were more and more of these incidents that were happening, which showed Oscar to be more volatile, more aggressive.
There was controversy on the track too. Having lost to Brazilian Alan Oliveira in the 200 metres final in London, Pistorius suggested his rival had cheated.
He said there was something wrong with my blades. After all that, it was difficult for me to stand beside him. He saw me at the Olympic Village and he refused to talk to me.
But the man who's become the new poster boy of Paralympic sport told me that Pistorius was also capable of surprising generosity.
You know, in the final in London, you know, he said just before, you know, do you mind if I pray for you, you know, and you know, he was a nice person to be there, but it's a crazy situation. But I think, you know, in terms of what he did for Paralympic sport, I think it says in itself, you know, he made that birth breakthrough.
At Pretoria University, where Pistorius based his training, a new generation of Paralympic hopefuls remain loyal.
He is still an inspiration for me, even though of his circumstances. As I lost my leg, I saw him doing so well without two legs, and he was a role model of mine.
As an athlete superhuman, as a man flawed, Pistorius will now be defined by events away from the track. Sport's ultimate fall from grace is complete. Dan Rowan, BBC News, Pretoria.
Well, with me, VATA NGOBENI, who's the sports editor of the Pretoria News newspaper, and Jean-Jacques Cornish, a local journalist. VATA NGOBENI, is there any conceivable future for Oscar Pistorius now?
It seems very, very bleak that he's going to have a future as an athlete going forward. You know, time has moved on. He's no longer the face of the South African para movement, and I think even worldwide as well. People are going to look at it and say, you know, he's been tainted. I find it very difficult to see him being able to go again and become the Oscar of old. You know, the Oscar that captured the world with his feats on the athletics track. I think, but more than anything, you know, he was, I think, a source of hope for a lot of people in South Africa, and at the moment, you know, that's all gone with what happened on Valentine's Day.
Jean-Jacques, you knew Oscar Pistorius pretty well. What does South Africa make of the fact that its absolute sporting icon and hero is now a convicted killer?
We're the country that invented the saying, no normal sport in an abnormal society. We realized that, you know, we occupied the apartheid era with sports boycotts, and so that sense of being sports mad and taking our heroes apart when they disappoint us or do something wrong is very central to our national psyche. So I think he would battle to make it, and I do think that time has moved on for him too. The records that he once held are all being broken. The Paralympic Association says if he's punished and pays his debt, he's perfectly entitled to perform again, but I think time will have passed him by. I think if Oscar Pistorius goes and does community service, whether he's instructed to or whether he does it voluntarily, he has some way there of vindicating himself, going to the townships and using the presence he has, the ability he has to share it and to show people. I think that would be the best thing for him.
So interesting, you were hinting at potential rehabilitation in the eyes of South Africans.
Oh yes, absolutely. If he did it that way, I mean, we've seen in Britain it happening, people that have really fallen low, picking themselves up by doing community service. And I think if Oscar did that and took a line, for example, on gun control, the sort of things that he has abused, if he tried to correct those things now, I think it would be a vindication for him, or could be.
Vata?
No, I've got to agree with JJ on that one. I think, you know, there's a lot of spade work he's going to have to do, you know, to just re-establish himself. You know, I think his image has been, you know, heavily tainted by this court case and his actions. And he's got to go back to the people that, you know, made him the hero. You know, he's got to go back to them and say to them, listen, guys, I'm sorry, I made a genuine mistake. If he does believe that he made a mistake, and again, as JJ said, go back into the townships, offer, you know, coaching lessons, and again, you know, try help out athletics in South Africa and help out, you know, a lot of abused women and so on, and try to get civil society to back him again.
Perhaps we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves in speculating about this, because at the moment we don't even know if Oscar Pistorius is going to jail, and if so, for how long. I mean, never mind what sort of impact this would have on the victim, Reeva Steenkamp's family.
Well, Reeva Steenkamp's family, we're hearing a lot of anger from Port Elizabeth, people saying that he got off because he had money and because he was famous. There is that kind of feeling, and that is pervasive in South Africa at this time. But whatever happens, you know, his family has said that they won't take a custodial sentence. They will appeal it. So if Judge THOKOZILE MASIPA does give him a custodial sentence mid-October, that will go on through the appellate division, through Constitutional Court. It will be many years before Oscar Pistorius walks through a prison gate.
VATA, very briefly.
No, again, I've got to agree with JJ there. I think they're going to take it, you know, the whole way. They want to see Oscar walk away scot-free from this. You know, as I said earlier on today, they genuinely believe that he made a mistake, and it's a very, very sad tragedy. And unfortunately, for South Africa, you know, a guy like Oscar's got a lot of money. His family's got money, so they will be able to exhaust all the legal, you know, system. Yeah.
VATA NGOBENI and Jean-Jacques Cornish, thank you very much indeed. So, of course, as we've learned tonight, this is certainly by no means the end of the legal process. From here in Pretoria, back to London.